Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast and to part 3 of the best of 2024. Please enjoy. Hey everyone, just a quickie before we get into the conversation. The podcast is always going to be free, so I'm never going to ask you to pay for anything. But if you could do me the kindness of subscribing and maybe leaving a review, that would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and enjoy the episode. How do desire and fear interact?
Well, it's interesting because that's the riddle of addiction. You can't have desire without that's the neuromodulators. Dopamine and adrenaline always fire together. They always fire together. You can't learn without adrenaline. You may be interested in something, but they fire together. So that's the riddle of addiction. You mind if I explain that to you?
Yes, please.
So what happens is...
I could probably go the wrong way around.
Right. Well, that's all right. So the way addiction works is all addiction is people get hung up on the fact that people are addicted to various substances and behaviors to make themselves feel good. I think they're hung up on the dopamine, and I think they're missing something. And I discovered in 2014, I figured out the riddle, and I've used this approach with men ever since, and I have an almost 100% resolution rate. Pretty close, in the 90%, and I've dozens and dozens and dozens of men. And so what happens is that all addiction is really an addiction to fear. It's not so much an addiction to dopamine, to feeling good. It's an addiction to fear, but it's masked by the feel-good parts. Now, let me explain that. So you get, if you're on the road and it's a rainstorm over there, and it's a terrible storm, it's really bad, and a lorry, a truck goes by you, and you're 2 lanes, and he's a little bit too close to you. And you think, son of a gun, this guy might pass me and hit my front fender. The first thing you'll do is your heart rate will go up, your blood pressure will go up, you'll grab that steering wheel. You may even hold your breath, and you'll steer that steering wheel to make sure you don't hit the guardrails, make sure you don't hit the back end of his truck until the danger passes, and then you'll calm down. Maybe you'll give him the finger, maybe you'll say thank the heavens, whatever, but you'll get through it. That's standard fight or flight. Follow? Mm-hmm. Now think of when a guy's working, and he's got taxes to pay. He's got, his brakes need to be done on his truck. He's got the children have to be taken here and there. He's got bosses he's got to answer, customers, co-workers. He's got all of this stuff on his mind. And it's Friday afternoon, and his buddy says, let's go to the pub, and we'll wait for the traffic to die down. We'll have a pint because we just got our paycheck. So he goes to the pub, and he has a beer. Well, within 2 beers, what's happening is that his heart rate goes up, his blood pressure goes up. You see people drink a long time, they get red up here from blood pressure. But his heart rate goes up, his blood pressure goes up, his breathing changes. But more critically, he takes many thoughts and he turns them into fewer thoughts. He narrows his focus. See, and that's the relief he gets. He puts his body into a physiological fear state. A mild one, but still it's a physiological fear state. And that relieves his stress temporarily. That's what he's after. It's a fear addiction. So now that works okay, but it's got a problem. When you put your body into a physiological fear state, absent visible threat, there's no real threat. He's sitting in a pub. Or he's sitting at his kitchen table, having a few pints. And his blood pressure's gone up, his heart rate's gone up, his breathing has changed, and there's no threat in front of him. We have a predictive brain. Now what you're doing is you're training the brain to be afraid when there's no fear in front of you. And there's nothing to be afraid of. That kills confidence, slowly but surely. Over many, many years of doing that,
Why?
Because it displaces confidence. You can't be fear and confident at the same time.
You think it comes out in like almost like neediness?
Well, if somebody is a regular drinker, they're hiding. They're a big scaredy cat. They might be boisterous and everything while they're drinking, right? But they don't have true confidence. It's put on. It's made up. Confidence is the stuff that takes thoughts and turns them into actions. Takes thoughts. I got an idea. I got a thought. I got something I want to do, and I go and do it. Turns them into action. And it only comes from actions. So if you put yourself into a fear state sitting at your kitchen table, you're just training your brain to be fearful. That's what you're doing. Doesn't matter if it's porn, if it's gambling, even overeating does that to a certain extent. Because you're putting yourself into a freeze state. People eat Thanksgiving dinner all together, and they say, well, we ate so much we couldn't move. It's immobilization. It's the digestive, it's the lower vagus, the most ancient part of your nervous system. You put yourself into a freeze.
The fear state, let me just kind of recap on that. So we're in the pub. I've got all these things going around in my head. I need to do this, and here's my life stress. I have a drink. After 3 drinks or so, the noise quietens in the sort of, would that be like the prefrontal cortex quietens down? Mm-hmm. And it becomes more fear-centered, so you're more amygdala heavy.
Yeah.
So it's like the chimp brain is taking over.
Yeah.
So you're saying we're addicted to the feeling of being in amygdala mode, and that's the addiction to fear.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's being in that kind of state, and depending on your trauma, etc., that's been kind of stored in your amygdala, that will color how you then act out those fears. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have I got that right?
Yeah, similar to that. That guy has 2-3 drinks at the pub, and he takes all of those. Now all he's thinking about is pizza and pussy, or maybe the game up on the giant screen. He's been able to sort of take all of his issues and put those to the side, and he's narrowed his focus. He's narrowed this focus, and you see this too, that it's a fear state. Guys go out to the pub on a Friday night, they get 10 pints in them, and then they want to fight everybody. Where do you think that's from? Male aggression? Bullshit. It's the fear state. You've ramped up your adrenaline. Now you see enemies everywhere. Not everybody, but there's a fair amount of guys who do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fear state. They're addicted to fear. Gabor Mate, bless his heart, he does all this trauma stuff, and I'm not so sold on the whole trauma thing. I think it gets overblown, and I think it gives people an excuse. Why do you drink? Well, I have trauma. Why did you relapse? Well, I have trauma. Wait a minute. So I think that gets overblown. But bless his heart, he wrote a different book called When the Body Says No. Right here.
Says no.
When the body says no. Yeah, when the body says no. And on it, on page 28, he says, for those habituated to high levels of internal stress since early childhood, it is the absence of stress that creates unease, evoking boredom and a sense of meaninglessness. people may become addicted to their own stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. Sans Selye observed. To such persons, stress feels desirable, while the absence of it feels like something to be avoided. That, to me, is the riddle of addiction right there. I wrote him about it, too, and I said, that's it right there. Right? And so we had this conversation. And yeah, that's where it's from. The rest of it is dubious, but that's what it is that if you have because now that we understand the predictive brain, if you are used to being in stress, if that's one of your default modes, sort of, let's say, if you're exposed a lot, you'll go seek it. Probably 20%, roughly, unscientifically, probably 20% of us have that bent. We're prone to it just because and the other thing about that is that means that person who is used to or has a facility with putting his body into a physiological fear state artificially, he can probably handle more fear than most people. If there was a war, they're the motherfuckers that are doing the scouting across behind enemy lines and coming back later, because they're ballsy motherfuckers. So that's informal and sort of my hypothesis, but I think that they end up having they can handle more fear. It's normal for them
Perhaps I'm square pegging round hole in this, but
yeah.
I think the fear and the level of dread that I used to go through from hangovers is unequivocal. Like that's the worst thing in the world. Like the most horrible, so in a weird way, I wonder if it kind of gives you some resilience. Because you've gone through
that's
these
interesting.
fucking horrible nights of withdrawal and
well, most people quit addictions by the age of 30 all on their own, without AA, without drug treatment, without on and so forth. They just quit on their own. And you think of it with males, it takes until the age of 25, 30 for that prefrontal cortex to come online, for the steering wheel to be fully installed. Takes us a while to mature. And most people quit on their own. They hit about 30, they go, what the fuck am I doing this to myself for? Well, they may have been just drinking before because they were fear seeking. They like to put themselves into a physiological fear state because it narrows their focus, but regardless of the consequences later, and they feel those consequences the next day and on and so forth. But then at some point they wake up and say, I'm not doing this anymore. But some others don't, and they're 40, 45 and their liver's shot and they've done all kinds of damage to their lives.
It's like that addiction to the familiarity of always being on, so it's like most people who have issues with addiction, they don't know how to relax. They don't know how to put themselves in a parasympathetic state.
Right.
And I was the same, I couldn't sit still without, I'll have a glass of wine to wind down. I could only relax with beer.
Right.
And I see a lot of people like this.
That's the fear seeker.
Yeah. To not have that, to not know what that feeling is like of just being kind of in that sort of serotonin mode, a beautiful walk in nature, and you kind of just like that feeling, to really know how to relax. And I think it's a big issue. I think so many people are afraid of their own thoughts, terrified of sitting down to meditate and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And the thing is that it displaces confidence. So over time, confidence becomes more and more elusive, and that becomes part of their shadow, their dirty little secret, and so it's really pushing confidence out of the possibility. Like if you do something like, the first time you stand up in front of a meeting at a Toastmasters meeting or give a presentation at work or something like that, if you don't die, from fright, when you leave that circumstance, you're a different person. And the next time there's a wedding and you have to give a toast, you can stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. My honor today you can do it because you've practiced it. You've done it. That gives you confidence. You only get confidence from actions, from doing something you haven't done. First time you go on a roller coaster ride, you're 7 or 8 years old. You're scared shitless, but you go on this roller coaster. You strap yourself in and you cross your fingers. You say, yeah, I want to go because it's kind of peer pressure. And then you go and you do the loop and you do the big drop and you come in at the end and you come off that roller coaster. The first thing a kid says is, again, let's do it again. He's changed. He's not the same kid as he was as when he went on. It changes you. So it's those actions that change you. You become something more. And that's how confidence is built. Well, alcohol and drugs, all addictions displace confidence because you're putting yourself into this fear state, absent visible threat. So it just confuses the brain. And the brain says, well, this is fucked. Let me put myself into another fear state because at least then I narrow focus. See, it becomes this thing like a dog chasing its tail. At first it's kind of funny. Look at that silly dog chasing its tail. Ha ha. Then you see how pathetic it is. Doesn't that stupid dog know that that's his tail he's chasing? It's funny at first, not so funny after a while, not so funny after 10 or 20 or 30 years. And so that's what happens. It displaces confidence. And I would argue that men need every bit of confidence they can get. We should defend our confidence because it's really hard. When you're in a situation and you're not confident, you feel it, man. It's painful. Like you feel it. So you should try to defend as much confidence as you can. So
I think that's the most unadvertised downside of alcohol and drugs would be that lack of confidence. Like that slow degradation over years and years and years. And then you turn up to a social gathering sober, and then you're like, fucking hell, I don't know how to talk to these women, or
that's right.
Because you've done it all your life with alcohol.
I write about that in Sipping Fear, Pissing Confidence. I talk about that in the introduction. About Paul, using alcohol to grease the wheels a little bit, to give himself the courage to ask girls to dance. But it's not real. He can't do it without alcohol. You see? Can't do it without, unless you can do it without alcohol, you haven't learned anything. You see? And it displaces confidence, it moves it aside. It's incompatible with confidence.
Yeah. 3 drinks in, and I'm like James fucking Bond. 5 drinks, it's an absolute disaster. But and also it's telling that James Bond was clearly a functioning alcoholic. So that's another.
That's the thing.
Another lesson. That's why we were being drip fed.
Genetics is not the sole determining factor. It's not the main determining factor. And I think, I was a child growing up in the 70s at the era of genetic discovery. In the 80s, I remember hearing, lots of times, oh, well, it's all in your genes. If you're overweight, it's in your genes. If you're this, it's in your genes. If you're going to get heart disease, it's in your genes. Yes, there is some genetic contribution, but actually we're not a hostage of our genes. And I think that that's a really powerful thing to understand, because it means that actually there is a lot we can do. And I think that many people are becoming very aware of this, that it isn't all in our genes, but there are still a lot of people that are like, oh, there's nothing I can do. Well, actually, what our research shows, and this is in line with other people researching in the area, that genetics plays some contribution, but actually the majority is modifiable. It's modifiable depending on what you're eating and on your lifestyle. So there's a lot we can do about it.
Yeah, and I feel like there's enough self-limiting beliefs out there, so we don't need to add that one into the mix. So, yeah, that's really insightful. So, before we get into like a little bit more detail about your research, I wondered if you could give us like a bit of a 1,000-foot view, world whistle-stop tour of what happens when we eat.
Wow. Okay, so when we eat food, we typically eat food, not nutrients. So we eat food that contains a mixture of macronutrients. So the main ones we think about are the fiber, the protein, the fat, the carbohydrate. The food also contains lots of micronutrients. So typically we think of vitamins and minerals, and it also contains lots of what we call bioactives. So these are chemicals like polyphenols, for example. So we now know that on average, food contains around 72,000 different chemicals. So firstly, I would say when we think about what happens when we eat food, we firstly need to recognize that food isn't just simply made up of those macros, that fat, that protein, that fiber, that carbohydrate. It's actually a complex mix of about 72,000 different chemicals that all interact with each other to modulate each other's health effect. That food is also encapsulated within a complex structure, which we call the food matrix. And we know that the food matrix also impacts to modulate how that food impacts our health. And we can always pick up on this later if you want, because I've done a lot of research around food matrix. So we're eating food, we're not eating nutrients, and we're eating food that has a particular matrix or structure. When we eat that food, what happens is in the short term, you have very short-term changes in circulating metabolites or downstream metabolites in our blood. So what happens is when the carbohydrate that's contained in the meal causes a short-term increase in circulating blood glucose. We call this postprandial glycemia. It peaks around 30 minutes after consuming the meal, returns to baseline around 2 hours. The fat in the meal causes an increase in circulating blood triglycerides. We call this postprandial lipemia. And that peaks around 4 hours after eating the meal, returns to baseline around 8 hours. So what happens is that in the pattern that we typically consume foods, where we have multiple snacks, multiple main meals, you actually spend most of your day in this state of what we call metabolic flux, where you're having these peaks and troughs in blood glucose, you're having these continually elevated peaks in circulating triglycerides. So apart from the few hours just before you wake up in the morning, depending on what time you have your last meal of the day, you actually spend most of your day in what we call this postprandial state. And prandial is just Latin for eating, so it's like post-eating state. And this is important because what we now know is most of the long-term impacts that food have on us are actually due to what happens in this postprandial state. Not all, but the majority. And so what we know is this postprandial state, where we have these increases in glucose, in insulin, in changes in gut peptides related to hunger and satiety, these changes in triglycerides also initiate a cascade of downstream health effects. So they initiate, for example, increases in inflammation, in oxidative stress, in clotting, etc. Now that's normal. That's a normal physiological response, and our bodies are very clever, so we're well able to handle that. But the problem is the kind of foods that we're eating now are causing quite excessive changes in these circulating metabolites that we believe over time are actually, our body cannot consistently handle, and then over time become harmful for us. And that's by having the kinds of foods that are causing really excessive peaks in some of these metabolites.
And
it's funny because dating and persuasion and sales and marketing is all very, very similar. So yes, if we look at it like a sales funnel, with dating, and especially on the apps, you want to get as many opportunities as possible for matches, because only a few of those matches will actually turn into a response. Only a few of those responses will turn into a date. If you filter too hard in the beginning, you don't get on dates. So you want to get more dates. And then from there you can filter, because then that's when you really get to know someone. I'm not saying that you should swipe yes, by the way, on every single woman. But what I am saying is you need a dating profile that's going to attract. What's that?
I said we do, though, us men.
I know.
Most lads can't help it. Yeah, she looks nice. She looks nice.
I mean, yeah. And that does happen. And listen, if you're leaning more to that side, that's probably better. If you're too picky on the dating apps as a man, you're not going anywhere. It's just not going to happen. So I would recommend that men open up a little bit more if they are like that. But most guys, like you said, are just kind of like, yeah. But you want to be careful of doing that. I don't have actual evidence of this, but logically it makes sense. I've heard that if you do that too much, then it hurts the algorithm. Yeah,
I've always thought that. Yeah. By the way, no, I don't like. When I used to drink, fucking hell, like, yeah, I get to a point and it would just be mindless. So no, I don't like just totally swipe through. But I always thought that. I always thought like, I wonder if, because I'm a little bit techie, I was like, I wonder if it like the algorithm picks up and then like lowers your quality.
Yep.
Like your score is.
I think it does. Again, I don't have proof of that. The dating apps keep all their stuff very secretive how they work it, but yeah,
seems like it changes quite a lot as well. Like I remember the first time I was on Tinder was like, I don't know, 2015 or something. And then I had a longish relationship, and then I came back around 2021 or something. And I was like, what the fuck? And I mean, I'd gotten older, obviously, but I was like, this used to be easier. And it just, like, I really noticed that the algorithm was just totally different. It was a bit like the old days if you had a business and you would post on Facebook and everyone would see it.
Yep.
And then the algorithm changed, and then it was like, no, it doesn't matter. Like, you've got to be paying for ads or...
Yeah, I think that's another tip I would give to guys is you have to pay for the dating apps. Do not use the dating apps for free. Again, I don't have proof here, but I do have proof, but I can't say for 100% sure. I don't know people at Hinge or whatever, but I know that people who pay for the subscription, the high tiered subscriptions to these dating apps, all of a sudden their algorithm changes and they start getting better matches. It happens all the time. And it should. They're providing you a service. They don't owe you anything. If anything, you owe them. They're giving you a valuable service that you can meet women. So just pay for it. And if you have a great profile, you'll be getting better matches.
Yeah, the whole like paying for the dating apps and the boosts or whatever, I do think it's fascinating because it's almost like by paying for it, it's like a proxy for like high status. Like I have resources to spend on boosts or whatever. So like it's almost like selecting out those guys and then they end up rising to the top just as an obvious consequence of that. But yeah, I feel like there's strategic ways to pay for them, right? Because like some things feel like I've done in the past where I'm like, wow, I'm just like throwing money down the drain. And then other things like maybe like the Hinge X.
Yeah.
Hinge X seems okay. Like it's not taking all your money. Whereas like Tinder boosts, sometimes like, I don't know what your thoughts are, but can just
I don't really subscribe too much to the boosts and stuff. I think it can help you. Yeah. I just want guys to pay for the app. So Tinder Gold, I think it's called now. It changes so much. Tinder Gold, Hinge X, whatever the next version of paying for the monthly thing is. And then if you want to do a boost every once in a while, go ahead and do that. But I don't think that's even necessary. Don't overthink that. Just buy the subscription. And guys, don't be cheap about it. It's like, clearly dating and sex and relationships are a very important part of one's life. So why would you not invest in that? Yeah, it can add up. You're on 3 different apps and you're paying for all of it. I don't know. It could be $100, $200 a month, but isn't that worth it? This isn't like you're paying for some silly game or something like that, or something that's not going to be worth it. It's really an investment into your dating life. So I would hope that guys would be okay with paying for that and not rolling their eyes at it, because it's something that the tough part is because you can do it for free. And so it's a big jump for people to think, well, now I got to pay for it. It almost makes you feel like you're a loser, or you're losing, or you're not getting the good deal, when it's actually the opposite. You're going to win more if you invest that money.
My 5-year plan for the podcast is to get to like 500 episodes. That's a goal.
Yeah.
Right.
But what happens when you get to 500 episodes?
Yeah, exactly. So it would be reach more people with alternative ideas, viewpoints, sharing stories. I'm fucking butchering this.
No, that's good. That's good. It's cool. Keep going. No, honestly.
I suppose because it's kind of like, it kind of is happening now in terms of like having meaningful, reflective conversations, learning for myself, and also teaching. People be learning as well. So that is happening, but I suppose like 5 years out, it'll be on a larger scale because I'll have more access to people higher up, and I'll be able to access more people.
Bigger audiences, more listeners. Why does that matter? Now, obviously, there's a financial aspect to that because more people listen, more sponsorship, blah, blah, blah. But why does it matter? What will happen if you become a brand name, like at the Diary of a CEO, right? If you became a brand name, why does that matter to you? Is it the conversations that people are going to hear that's different? That's the vision. Is why does it matter?
Yeah, like figuring out that core motivation. And I suppose because if you don't map that out as well, you get to episode 500 and you go, like you say, how did I get here? Like, what's the fucking point?
Yeah.
Is it just for listeners? Honestly, yeah, I want bullshit. Like, maybe I don't have that right now, but maybe I don't have that mapped out. Because at the moment, it's kind of like I'm just enjoying it. I'm enjoying speaking to new people, enjoying like broadening my network, like on a real selfish point of view. Like, I'm making more connections. I'm opening myself up to different points of view. I'm learning. And I suppose it's just like the more episodes I do, the better that gets. The better my skills as a interviewer, as someone who can talk to the camera. But yeah, probably do need to like work on, and I do have like this kind of deep kind of thing going on where like, I do want to have a platform to be able to like share like different ideas. But to be honest, it's probably a little bit pithy at the moment. So maybe I need to.
But that's the key. At some point, we need to really clarify what that looks like. Like, we really need to clarify what that looks like, because that's how you get people on board, when you can really clarify what that looks like.
Yeah, that North Star.
Aye, absolutely.
Very cool. All right, so MQ.
Motivational intelligence.
Yeah, what's MQ?
So, as I said, you've got IQ, EQ, and MQ. So, the way that we describe motivational intelligence is, so I'll give you the definition of it, So motivational intelligence enables people to identify and manage negative thought and self-limiting beliefs of themselves and of others to enable them to overcome obstacles in life and achieve their goals. So that's what MQ means. So I suppose another way to describe it is, you know that wee voice, right, that we've all got, right? So the wee voice in your head, right, that's sitting telling you all the things that you can and cannot do. Some people are able to overcome that, right, and overcome their obstacles in life and just go for it. And some people constantly struggle, right? That's motivational intelligence. Another way is, think about anybody who's successful at anything in life, whether it's playing a guitar, playing football, whatever it is. Anybody that's hydro, what's it, so that thing you
High
got
rocks.
high rocks, right? So the best of the best at high rocks, right? They weren't born to be the best of the best at high rocks, but they made a decision. And by the way, they probably felt a lot of the things you felt. Oh, you know, training every day, but they're always able to get out of their bed and put in that extra hour. Because the best of the best, that's what they do, right? They'll put in, they work a little bit harder than everybody else. They get a little bit up a little bit earlier than everybody else. They put in an extra hour or two at the weekend more than everybody else. That's what makes them the best of the best. That's motivational intelligence. It's identifying what could stop you, creating a mental plan, how you're going to overcome it, making it a habit, and then overcoming it, and away you go. Because once you make it a habit and you overcome it, guess what? You've taken over that negative dominant thought. You've changed it into a positive dominant thought, and all of a sudden you're taking positive actions. And that's in any aspect of life. But it's also being able to do it for others, Jason, not just for yourself. So from a leadership mindset, you've got this person sitting across the desk from you, you know, in another office, and they just always make excuses. They're always pointing fingers. They're always placing blame. It's being able to sit down and having the right conversations with them, trying to understand what's holding them back, because there's always something up here holding them back. Always. And it could have been a bad manager before. It could have been something that's happened in their life in their past. They've brought something to the table that's causing these negative dominant thoughts. And a leader's job is to identify them, to help them manage them, to overcome them, turn those obstacles into opportunities, and then achieve their goals for their business or career. And that's called leadership motivational intelligence, which we specialise in.
LMQ.
I like that.
Okay, give me like a framework or a set of questions that I could, or a leader could sit down with themselves to do LMQ to, like, you know, let's say you're working for me, we sit down, we're on a Zoom call, and I'm wanting to understand, I wanted to do LMQ.
Yeah.
What's some kind of like frameworks and questions that I can ask?
This is honestly is really, really, really simple. Just ask really good questions. So tell me, Jason, I've noticed the last couple of months things are starting to, you know, slip, and I see you don't look just as confident and happy at work. You know, can I ask you why? And by the way, Jason, there is no right or wrong answer. I'm here to help you get back to who you were. So please don't feel that this conversation is about, you know, worrying about your job or anything like that. So first of all, you need to clarify, because if you haven't built that relationship, you need to make that person trust you, right? So you've got to build the trust before you start asking the questions. So if you ask somebody the questions that don't trust you, they won't answer. And then it's asking the questions, just deep diving into what's going on. Get them to talk about it and let them know it's a safe space. Let them know that the conversation won't go beyond you and him, and that you're actually, you or her or whoever it is, and you're actually here to support them. Once people start to open up and talk, 50% of the problem is gone. Because it's probably the first time somebody's ever fucking asked them. What's going on? And it could even be something as simple. This is real life experiences, something that actually has happened. It could be that you just sit down and say, so tell me, Jason, I've been with the company 5 years, you're doing a pretty good job. What's next? Where do you want to go? I really love my job. But if you could choose a career path in this company, where would that be? You know what? I've actually always wanted to get into project management. Let's make it happen. What I'll do, why don't you go away, Jason, and get a couple of project management courses, put a plan in place, and let's actually action it. Let's really authenticity, willingness to genuinely invest in the person. That's that's how you drive that into leadership. It's got to be genuine, and you've got to be willing to invest your time in that person. And then it's just about asking questions.
How can we identify and communicate our sexual needs?
One thing that I really like is actually that comes from Emily Nagoski. She has she wrote a great book called Come As You Are, and she also has workbooks for it and so on. So what she does, what I try to implement in therapy is that you think about the times that you were physically intimate with someone, and you think about the times that were really, really great, like somehow, I don't know, they were specifically hot or you felt specifically relaxed, but anyway, whatever shows up in your top 5, and you write them down, and then you start comparing, what are the common factors in this? Is it the place? Is it a specific feeling? Is it what you were wearing, maybe? It could be anything, really. But you find common factors, and that gives you a pretty good clue of where you're going, because we're all individual in what we like and what's what kind of rings the bell. And I always find that to be very helpful, actually, because you get a strategic way of figuring this out.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that one. Yeah, I've just got to think about 5 times that I've had sex in my life.
Yeah. Well, it does take some time.
To go back to fucking 2007.
Well, my memories go back. Yeah, no worries. I'm guessing, that happened.
Yeah, I like that one. So identifying, so with this down, top 5 sexual experiences, what are the commonalities in that?
Yeah.
And then I was going to say it's something judgy then. I was going to say, and then good luck. See what it spits out at the end.
Well, yeah, but honestly, yes. I remember doing this for the first time.
I was buried underground on every one of them.
I did have a little moment of surprise of oh, really? Okay. I mean, there were factors that I was well aware of, but there were also factors that I wasn't. And it's we're all dealing with some sort of shame and upbringing and whatever. So it will touch sensitive spots, surely, because that's why it works. That's why it's hard.
Can you guess my next question?
No.
Would you be willing to share what those things were for you? Don't feel pressured.
I was well aware that not all of them, but a few of them were in public settings. So that's a factor for me, is could get caught doing something forbidden,
Chicks love that shit.
Why though? Why? Questions why? But anyways, so that's one thing that I can remember. And then just one thing that I can remember that was kind of was it was kind of a power play always in it. So just very like just psychologically that I know my sex partners would just say stuff that I don't know, maybe is a little messed up. I'd be like, oh, you know, where it's not degrading. I think that was the surprising part for me, was that I'm actually not a BDSM chick, which I would have supposed before. And I was like, no, actually, that's not it. I'm not into them degrading me or belittling me or all of that. That's actually, I don't think that's hot. But there is something in there where it establishes kind of a hierarchy, just verbally. I don't know what that is, but it's just something that was common, is that people would say stuff like, I know, I don't want to share the really intimate stuff, so I have to think about the things that I can share. Yeah, I mean, really just stuff like, oh, you like that? Yeah, do you want me to do more of that? You know, like simple stuff. And then if that gets like more and more into that direction, more and more it works, kind of. So it is kind of a power play. Yeah, really. And I did not like, that was just an interesting insight for me.
Didn't realize, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. What about...
but also, wait, I want to add something wholesome to that. Just to complete that. One thing that I also was not aware of before is that a lot of my excitement comes from the other person's excitement. Like 80% is, the better the time the other person has, the better my time. You know?
Interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah. I've got my little bro therapist head on now, thinking, I wonder why that is. All comes back to childhood, though, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Yeah. Oh,
That's
God.
what's so fucked up about this stuff.
Exactly.
All your sexual stuff.
Because I think like people who have no context to that, they probably will be like, okay. But then you have your context and you're like, gross.
Can you give me some examples? This is not on you, don't worry. Can you give me some examples of kinks or desires in which people, perhaps in your practice or just, day-to-day life, whatever, have felt a lot of shame around, and maybe someone in the audience is likely to have this kink as well? That question was so long, I've forgotten the start of it. Some examples of those kinks in which people feel shame around and which actually are okay, that we can breathe out into the air.
Yeah, there's the absolute most prominent example is violence of any sort. I think that's the most common thing, that even though you would think that the public discourse has opened up so far about this, that people would actually relax into that. But like so many people that I work with still feel like a very intense shame about wanting to get your ass slapped, basically. And they just have the more specific the scenario is, the more shame it brings up for them. That's something that I noticed. So getting your ass slapped isn't very shameful for the very most people anymore. But someone expressing I don't know, I want you to slap my face and tell me I'm a dirty bitch. That's something that brings up shame for a lot of people. And if I could collectively inform everyone, I would tell them that that is something that is emancipating to people. Like, you must not be ashamed of it, because it does not serve the purpose that you think it does.
Sorry, what does emancipate mean?
It means it brings you from being in a passive, victimized position into an active position, right? So the classical example is someone who has experienced violence in their childhood or early youth, and then they act out like violent scenarios in their sex life. So, and violent really just meaning, I don't know, just get your cheeks clapped or whatever.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is that you are reliving these situations, but now you're in charge. You have a certain kind of power here, right? Nothing is happening without your consent. You are actively seeking this out, which means you are the one who is in power.
Do you think it's a little bit like as if you did like let's say you did some sort of form of trauma therapy, and you went back to your younger self, and you imagined yourself as a child, like they do this in like tapping and those type of therapies, and you go back and then you kind of like see that child, and then you try and like give the child what it maybe needed in that position, and you're trying to rewire those neural connections, right?
Yeah.
And what he's saying is you can do the same thing or a similar thing. No, because
what I've noticed is that people will do that, like inner child work with me, or reparenting, or whatever you want to call it, and it will not change their like sexual desires. Because the experience.
No, it wasn't mean. But do you think it's therapeutic to them and kind of lessen?
Yeah.
Because you're putting yourself in that state that the child was in, or whatever. But like you say, them having some agency and able to enjoy the situation because they're.
Well, it can be, not necessarily is. It might just be that you're kind of reliving that state. Really depends on like your emotional state while you're doing it. But that's very individual. I'm just saying that it's not something that you need to be ashamed of. Also, one thing that it serves for people who have, for example, no experience with like physical violence, it also, like these typical rape fantasies, for example, that also can serve a purpose of if I have a very strong shame around my own desires, like just being horny is attached to a lot of shame, then I will need to find a workaround that shame, because if I'm extremely ashamed, I can't have sex, right? It's just like, it just doesn't work. It's like when you're really, really disgusted, it just doesn't work. The system is just kind of blocking it. Same happens with like an extreme amount of shame. But what you can do is that you imagine, or you enact in like some sort of role play, your partner being so aroused by your sheer presence that they kind of force themselves onto you. And it takes out your own desire entirely out of the equation. So that's something that it also does. And also no need to be ashamed of that, because you've just worked around not being ashamed. So don't bring that up again.
Yeah. Are there any others? Any other particular kinks or?
That's the most common ones that I can think of. And then, I don't know, if it's like something very specific, like material, for example, it's not as common, but also sometimes people have that. That's also just really nothing to be ashamed of, because it's just a sensual thing. It's just about like you enjoy touching things in your daily life as well. It's the same thing. It's just like a higher level of arousal.
Mm.
I have this like real running guilt when I tap into this like self-centered stuff where I'm like asking for some help. I think someone said to me actually, I actually spoke to you a little bit offline about it. And someone said to me, was it like you can't just have it as a therapy, a published therapy session for yourself. And I'm kind of like, so while I'm doing all this, I'm kind of like, there's this like part of me that's going, you're so selfish. All you think about is yourself. No one's interested. All you're doing is subtracting. All you're doing is taking from Joey. You're not giving anything. So this is what's running. And then on the other side of it, so because along with this, this vision work I've been doing, or this why work, I did reach out to some people and ask them like, do you think I actually have anything to offer? Like, as in, and I'm doing it now because now I'm like, oh, you're looking for validation, you're looking for compliments, but genuinely, I would be asking, is there something that you believe that I can offer? Like, so let's say tomorrow, 5 years goes by, I've got 500 episodes, and I'm as well known as whatever the podcasters are. So I've got access to all these guests. Are they better going to another podcaster, or do I have something different? Does that make sense? So am I just a blend of like Chris Williamson, Russell Brand, and Andrew Huberman? I don't know. Like, do you know what I mean? Are they better just going to the source, or do I have something different? So this is what I've been really sitting with. Sorry, I've added a few things in there, and also then I'm like, this is my like unique thing. Like I open up about stuff, and I share my struggles or whatever. So on one side of that, people have said that that's valuable, but then the other side, there's like, no one cares, and that's why you'd have more people listening if you weren't just, I don't know. And honestly, I'm really cognizant that I don't want to seem like I'm asking for validation. I just wondered, like, what do you think?
The first thing I think, it's not going to answer that last question. The first thing I think is, do you know where all of those voices belong to? You asked quite a few questions, right? Should I be taking from my guests? Should I be sharing so much? Should I be making this so much about me? Can I do this? And then it sort of traces into questions of what do I have to offer? And are they better going to the source? All of those questions, are those your voice, or do they represent other people's voices?
Probably other people's voices, I think.
It might be a really freeing exercise, and this is something that I do in story work, is to trace each of those questions to the first time you heard it and send it back home to the person who gave it to you. Say, thank you for that offer. I don't need you anymore. If it doesn't serve me in this moment right now, I found who the owner is. and send it off. It will quiet your internal dialogues down a lot and give you enough airtime inside there to hear where your voice is. It's a little bit of a different technique than just meditation. And then when you can hear your voice, and this takes time and it takes practice, but you will recognize your voice. Your voice sounds different from anybody else's voice. Then you have to make a better relationship with that voice. You have to choose to trust it. And this might involve some rewiring of the nervous system and doing some somatic practices so that we can really strengthen that relationship with that voice. But then, what do you think happens when you start to feel that need for validation? If you can hear your own voice and you can trust it, what do you think happens?
If I can hear my own voice, what happens to that need for validation? You can self-validate. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You ask yourself. You ask yourself, because you're going to trust yourself. You're going to trust that all your lived experiences, all the lessons you've learned, all the great teachers who have imparted on you, and that growth mindset that you have that loves to think, that's so curious, that loves to explore, that loves to help others, that created a whole podcast to be vulnerable and make sense of yourself in conversation and dialogue with other people, that, you know, you're offering that to your audience so that they can hopefully see parts of themselves in it. You start to trust all the things that you know about yourself. And your voice cuts through all the noise to remind you. You also start to trust that your voice is going to call you in or call you out when you need to shift and align and say sorry and say thank you and come back to yourself or realign or check yourself. Like, you make space to just be the human being that is Jason in this moment. It becomes so much more simple.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think do you know because on the one hand you have like people who go it's your podcast. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's your podcast. People tune in to you. Therefore, you're a unique thing is sharing stuff about yourself. And then you have the other hand where it's like, but it's about the guest. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
So as you're wondering this right now, what is the problem that you're trying to solve?
If it's a wholly is it a wholly selfish process when I ask questions that relate to my own individual experience on this podcast? That's the problem I'm trying to solve.
I'm gonna offer you something that was really profound when it was offered to me years back. I can share that story in a moment, but I'm gonna offer a question. What if the answer is that it is very selfish? What does that mean?
So yeah, I've got two paths. One's like, well, fuck them, I'm doing what I want. And then the other side is stop sharing stuff about yourself, Jason. Just ask questions. Only focus on the guests. Don't offer anything of yourself. And then that's also and it's safer over there because it's less vulnerable. So we'll just do that.
So for me, I was wrestling with hyper analyzing all of my words and actions with others because I was so afraid, am I being manipulative? Because I had grown up in a house with where that was something I experienced quite a bit. So I was so afraid to become the people in my family of origin or the people who had done harm to me through what I experienced as manipulation, that as a young adult, I was hyper critical and hyper fearful of myself for being manipulative, right? For becoming manipulative or having others, actually not even being manipulative, because I never really had the intention, was for others to experience me as manipulative. And when a peer asked that question to me, so what if the answer is yes? What if the answer is yes? It stopped me in my tracks because it realized, like, if the answer is yes, then can I trust myself to unlearn that habit? Can I trust myself to, if I am so fearful of it, what's the why behind it? Well, I don't want to cause harm. Can I trust that as my compass? That intention of, I'm not here to cause harm. And if I do unintentionally cause harm, can I trust my follow-up actions to then repair, right? So I want to offer you in the same way. Maybe it's not so extreme, end all be all, one or the other. Either it's fuck it, I'm selfish, I'm doing this, or no, I found out I'm selfish, so I can't do it at all. Can we call in a place of, if any of this is selfish, I'm only asking this question because I don't want to be a selfish person. I actually care so much about my guest's experience and my audience's experience, and that this is just my way of exploring. And if someone experienced it as selfish, can I trust myself to sit with that, filter it, process it, and then refine my actions and behaviors to be a little less selfish next time, while staying true to myself and bringing more reciprocity to my guests and my audience? Can I do that? I bet you can.
Yeah. Yeah, that yeah. Like so many things like flying off, like little trains of thought, and I'm like, oh God. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna need to reflect on that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to shift gears now.
Let's do it.
Okay.
You good?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a weird few months. I might not include this bit. Yeah, it's just been a weird few months. Lots of like kind of self-reflection and this like selfishness thing coming in over and over again. And it's kind of like, I don't know. And now I feel like in a way it's kind of like it's actually harming my joy that I get from the podcast, because I can't just be like, hey, I'm just being vulnerable, I'm just like talking about my shit, and then all of a sudden I've got this like voice in my head now going, what you're doing is wholly and only for you. But then that also like gives it more energy the more that I think on it. Yeah, it's I think as well, like I had not only is the work of the podcast, keeping up with it, being quite a lot of late, but also my listenership has just like gone through the floor. It's really dropped off. So you try not to look at this. I've always tried to not to look at the analytics too much. But then when it's like week after week and you kind of like, it then becomes like a value judgment on yourself. And you start to go, why? And then all them doubts that you had that were lingering, where you're able to go, nah, fuck you, like it's fine because the podcast is growing. Then the podcast stops growing, and then you go, well, it's because of that. So, and I suppose it's like the questions that I'm asking now, the questions that I was just asking you a moment ago, are they to help the 2 years ago, Jason? Are they to help that avatar? Or are they just to help me? And is there a difference between that?
Yeah. And could we expand that question? And I want to respect that you asked to switch gears, so I know.
No, we're good. No, I think it's just like it's just a fear response. So, because I'm like, fuck, I've talked about this too long. So that's why I was like, oh shit, I've got like loads of stuff that we need to talk about.
We can definitely shift gears. I just wanted to offer that if you are asking if it helps you, or 2 years ago, Jason, I think just expand that question to, if it helps me, is it going to help anyone else? Because, as humans, we're not all that different. And most of the things that help us, anything that helps us, I believe, is going to help someone out there. And I can understand how, the metrics and the numbers and things can feel like, well, what am I doing this all for? And I just want to encourage you. I think that when you do a little bit more of this work that you've already started and you've been called into, when you find those values and that mission behind all of this, and then you also untangle those voices, it will allow you the space to get curious about the metrics, like you're doing R&D, you're doing, data analytics, but without it having to interfere too much with your sense of self, and especially not your sense of worth or your sense of trust in the mission that you're carrying out by doing this, because it's not a small thing. It is a lot of work, and most people wouldn't do it. And there's something really, I believe, divinely appointed and noble for anybody doing a creative endeavor. So I just send you so much love and hope that you can continue to tap into that, whatever brought you to start this, so that you can feel sustained and keeping it going.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Okay. Hey guys, it's me. Thank you so much for watching that episode, and congratulations for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. A few things before you get going. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to share it with a friend or family member. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to both my guests and myself. And if you made it this far, why don't you drop me a DM?